Someone pitches an idea that's obviously flawed. Everyone nods, everyone agrees. You can see the holes in the logic, the problems nobody's addressing, the consequences they're not thinking through. So you speak up, not aggressively, not arrogantly, just honestly. You point out what seems obvious to you, and the room goes quiet, not thoughtful quiet, uncomfortable quiet. Eyes shift. Someone clears their throat. The person who pitched the idea looks wounded. Your manager looks annoyed. You just became a problem. Not because you were wrong, because you broke the unspoken rule. Don't question. Don't think too hard. Don't make people uncomfortable with reality. The meeting ends. Nothing changes about the decision, but something changes about you. Later, you're not included in the next project. You're labeled difficult. Not a team player. Lacks political savvy. You didn't get fired for thinking. You just stopped getting opportunities. That's how society punishes men who think for themselves. Not dramatically, not obviously, quietly, systematically, through 1,000 small exclusions, until you either learn to shut up or leave. If you've ever been punished for being right at the wrong time, this isn't about why you're the problem. This is about why independent thought terrifies people who've built their entire lives on conformity, and why the punishment is designed to be invisible enough that you can't even prove it's happening. Let's start with something fundamental that nobody wants to admit. Modern society doesn't function through force anymore. It functions through manufactured consensus. And manufactured consensus requires that the majority of people don't question the foundations of the system they're living in. A man who thinks for himself isn't just inconvenient, he's a systemic failure. A glitch in the matrix that has to be corrected. Think about how a corporation actually works. It needs employees to accept the hierarchy, not because the hierarchy is just or makes sense or puts the most competent people in charge, but because the entire operational structure collapses if everyone starts questioning whether their boss deserves that position. A man who questions his manager's competence, even when he's objectively correct, becomes a threat to operational stability. The issue isn't whether he's right. The issue is that him being right and saying it out loud destabilizes the system. So the system removes him, not for being wrong, for being disruptive to a consensus that everyone else has agreed to pretend is real. The political system works the same way. Modern democracy depends on predictable tribes. Left versus right, red versus blue, progressive versus conservative. The entire machinery of politics is built on the assumption that people will sort themselves into these categories and stay there. A man who refuses to align with a tribe becomes impossible to mobilize. He has no political utility, so both sides punish him through ostracism. The left calls him right-wing, the right calls him left-wing. Neither wants him because he can't be controlled through tribal loyalty. He thinks his way through each issue independently instead of adopting the package deal his tribe offers. That makes him useless to political operators who need predictable voting blocks. Even consumer culture is built on this. The entire economy of desire depends on manufactured want. You need this car to signal status. You need these clothes to be attractive. You need this house to prove you've made it. A man who rejects that narrative stops consuming in predictable ways. Marketing doesn't work on him. He becomes invisible to an economic system built on insecurity and social competition. The culture simply roots around him like he doesn't exist. Now let me show you the 3 mechanisms through which this punishment actually operates. First, there's social ostracism. But it's not dramatic. Nobody announces that you're being excluded. You just stop getting invited. Not to the formal meetings, you still get those, but to the informal conversations where real decisions get made. The drinks after work, the group chat, The weekend plans. You're technically still part of the team, but you're not really in the loop anymore. And when you notice and ask about it, you're told you're being paranoid. You're making it weird. There's no conspiracy. You're just not a culture fit. The language they use is deliberately vague. He doesn't gel with the team. She has an unusual communication style. There's something off about his energy. They never say what they actually mean, which is, this person thinks for themselves, and it makes us uncomfortable because we've agreed not to do that. Because if they said that out loud, they'd have to confront what they're actually doing. So they use soft language that sounds reasonable but means nothing. And you can't fight back against nothing. You can't defend yourself against vibe. Second mechanism is professional stagnation. You're technically competent, maybe even exceptional at your actual job, but you never get promoted past a certain point. The feedback is always the same. Lacks leadership potential, needs to work on soft skills, doesn't demonstrate executive presence. What they actually mean is, this person won't convincingly sell narratives they don't believe. And leadership in most organizations isn't about competence. It's about the ability to enthusiastically promote the company line even when you know it's questionable. There's actual research on this. Studies show that people who get promoted aren't more competent than those who don't. They're more conformist. They've mastered what's called political savvy, which is code for knowing when to shut up and smile. A man who thinks for himself fails this test constantly because he can't fake enthusiasm for ideas he finds stupid. He can't pretend to believe what he doesn't believe, so he hits a ceiling. Not because he lacks ability, because he lacks the capacity for self-deception that advancement requires. Third mechanism, and this one's newer, is algorithmic punishment. Social media platforms don't ban dissenting voices outright anymore. That's too obvious, creates martyrs, generates backlash. Instead, they use shadow bans and reach reduction. Your posts just don't get shown to people. You're shouting into a void that looks like it should have an audience, but somehow never does. The punishment is invisible. You can't prove it's happening. The algorithm just somehow never recommends your content. A tweet questioning the dominant narrative gets 50 views. A tweet conforming to it gets 5,000. The platform isn't technically censoring you, it's just not amplifying you. And over time, you learn. You see what gets engagement and what disappears. The algorithm trains you to conform without ever explicitly telling you to. It's Pavlovian. And it works. Most people eventually just start saying what gets rewarded and stop saying what gets buried. The ones who don't simply become invisible. Now here's the part that's specifically brutal for men. There's a cultural expectation that men should be assertive, should have strong opinions, should speak their minds. But that permission only applies within accepted parameters. Assertiveness, in defense of the status quo, makes you a natural leader. Assertiveness, in questioning it, makes you arrogant, difficult, a problem. The exact same behavior gets completely opposite interpretations depending on whether you're conforming or dissenting. And there's a gender double standard in how dissent gets interpreted. When a woman disagrees with consensus, the framing is often, she has a different perspective. She's bringing a fresh viewpoint. When a man disagrees, the framing is, he thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He's being condescending. He's mansplaining. Same action, different social consequence. Because a man who thinks independently represents a different kind of threat than a woman who does. He threatens the hierarchy directly. He's claiming authority through independent thought rather than through position, and hierarchies can't tolerate that. Michel Foucault wrote about this in Discipline and Punish. He said disciplinary power is exercised through its invisibility. While it imposes on those, it subjects a principle of compulsory visibility. What he meant is, the system doesn't need to physically restrain you to control you. It just needs to make you visible when you deviate. The spotlight turns on the moment you step out of line. Everyone can see you now. And that visibility itself becomes the punishment. You're marked. Everyone knows you're the one who doesn't go along, and that mark follows you. Nietzsche said something that applies here perfectly. Madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages, it is the rule. Collective madness is just consensus that's never been questioned. The sane individual is the one asking if the emperor has clothes, but the group treats him like he's crazy. Because from inside the collective delusion, the person pointing out reality looks delusional. The inversion is complete. Let me walk you through 5 specific forms this punishment takes. First is institutional gaslighting. You point out that a policy or decision is obviously flawed. The response isn't to address your concern, it's to tell you you're overreacting. You're being too negative. You're not seeing the bigger picture. They make you doubt your own perception. I've seen this in corporate settings more times than I can count. Company announces restructuring. Everyone knows it's code for layoffs. You mention this in a meeting. HR looks at you like you're insane. No, this is about creating opportunities for growth. This is about agility and innovation. 3 months later, mass layoffs. Nobody ever acknowledges you were right. They just move on. And if you bring it up, you're the one being petty, holding grudges, not being a team player. The psychological cost of this is severe. You start doubting your own judgment. Maybe I am seeing threats that aren't there. Maybe I am too cynical. Or you harden completely and stop sharing what you see. Either way, the system wins. Either you stop trusting yourself, or you stop participating. Both outcomes serve the goal of maintaining consensus. Second form is weaponized therapy language. This one's insidious because it sounds enlightened. You raise a legitimate criticism and get told, you seem very cynical. That's quite negative thinking. You might want to work on your resistance to change. They've turned psychological language into a tool for delegitimizing dissent. Any disagreement becomes evidence of your personal issues. You're not making a valid point. You're projecting. You're triggered. You need to work on yourself. I see this in relationships too. You criticize your partner's behavior. She responds with, "That's your abandonment trauma talking. You're being controlling. You need therapy." Maybe she's partially right. Maybe you do have unresolved issues. But she's using therapeutic language to avoid accountability. She's medicalizing your disagreement. And once disagreement becomes pathology, there's no way to have the conversation. You're either sick or you agree with her. Those are your options. Third form is credentialism. You present a logical argument. The response is, are you an expert in this field? Do you have a PhD? This is very complex. Maybe leave it to the professionals. They substitute credentials for logic. It doesn't matter if your reasoning is sound. What matters is whether you have permission from the credential class to have an opinion. And here's the irony. Most major innovations came from outsiders. The Wright brothers weren't aeronautical engineers. Steve Jobs wasn't a computer scientist. Independent thinking requires distance from orthodox training, but the system punishes exactly that distance. You're not qualified becomes the shield against having to engage with the actual argument. Fourth form is moral panic. Your opinion doesn't just get disagreed with, it gets framed as dangerous. This kind of thinking is harmful. You're radicalizing people. This leads to extremism. they transform disagreement into a moral emergency. And once your thought is categorized as dangerous, engaging with it becomes morally suspect. People won't even consider your argument because considering it might contaminate them. I've watched this happen in real time on social media. Someone questions any mainstream narrative and immediately gets labeled a conspiracy theorist spreading misinformation. Doesn't matter if there's evidence. The act of questioning itself is treated as immoral. Jordan Peterson said something about this that stuck with me. If you don't say what you think, then you kill your unborn self. When you silence your own thoughts out of fear, you murder the version of yourself that could have existed if you'd had the courage to speak. Society does this systematically. It creates an environment where speaking honestly feels like stepping onto a landmine. So people don't. They kill their unborn selves every day to stay safe. And the aggregate effect is a culture where almost nobody says what they actually think. Fifth form is economic punishment. This is the most brutal because it's the most material. You lose income for thinking differently. You get fired, cancelled, blacklisted, not for incompetence, for dissent. And the examples are everywhere now. Academics lose positions for publishing politically incorrect research. Journalists get fired for reporting facts that contradict approved narratives. Executives are forced to resign over tweets from years ago. It's not about right or wrong, it's about conformity. And the message is clear. Independent thought is a financial liability. The chilling effect of this is enormous. You watch someone's career get destroyed for saying something true but inconvenient. You learn the lesson. Don't take that risk. The system doesn't need to punish everyone. It just needs to make examples of enough people that everyone else self-censors. That's way more efficient than direct control. Now let's be honest about costs, because there are two paths here, and both have prices. If you conform, if you sell your mind for social acceptance and professional advancement, here's what it costs you. First, chronic cognitive dissonance. You know the truth, but you say the opposite. The human brain doesn't tolerate that split indefinitely. Research shows that sustained cognitive dissonance produces measurable psychological and even physical symptoms: anxiety, depression, psychosomatic illness. You can't lie to yourself forever without it eating you from the inside. Second cost is loss of identity. You become a parrot. You repeat what's safe. You stop knowing what you actually think because you stopped thinking years ago. The muscle atrophies. You can't even access your own genuine opinions anymore because you've spent so long performing agreement that you've forgotten how to disagree, even internally. Third cost is self-respect. You look at yourself in the mirror and you know what you are. You know you're a coward. That knowledge corrodes everything. No amount of external success compensates for it. You can have the career, the house, the approval, all of it, and still hate yourself because you know you bought it by betraying your own mind. Solzhenitsyn wrote about this in Live Not by Lies. He said the simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world. You don't have to be a hero. You don't have to lead a revolution. You just have to not lie. Even that, just not actively participating in deception, that's become an act of courage in our time. But there's also a cost to resisting. First, social isolation. You lose friends. Not through dramatic conflicts necessarily, just through growing incompatibility. They're living in the matrix of consensus. You stepped out. You can't relate anymore. Their concerns seem trivial to you. Your concerns seem paranoid to them. The friendship just dies quietly. Second, professional stagnation. You might not advance as fast, not because you're incompetent, but because you won't play political games. There's a real ceiling for honest people in dishonest systems. You might hit it. You need to decide if you can live with that. Third, constant psychological pressure. You're always in the minority, always swimming against the current. It's exhausting. Some people break under that pressure. They either conform eventually, or they become bitter and isolated, walking that line between maintaining integrity and not becoming a miserable contrarian. That's hard. It requires constant calibration. Fourth, self-doubt. Sometimes you think, what if I'm wrong? What if they're right and I'm just arrogant? That doubt never fully goes away. You have to learn to live with it, to hold your position while staying open to being wrong. That's psychologically demanding. So which cost is worse? There's no universal answer. For some men, conforming is unbearable. Their psychological makeup won't allow it. For others, resisting is unsustainable. They need social acceptance to function. It depends on your constitution. But here's the pattern I've noticed. The cost of conforming is internal, invisible, cumulative. The cost of resisting is external, visible, immediate. Most people choose conformity because external pain is intolerable, while internal pain can be ignored, at least for a while, until it can't. Until the internal accumulation reaches critical mass, midlife crisis, breakdown, that moment where you realize you wasted your life being what you were told to be. And sometimes that realization comes too late. Now let me give you some practical strategies, because I'm not just going to tell you to be brave. I'm going to tell you how to be strategic. First, understand what I call the Oram rule. William Oram was an academic who got cancelled for expressing unpopular views. He learned too late that some thoughts cannot be expressed publicly without destroying your life. That doesn't mean those thoughts are wrong. It means society isn't ready for them and will punish you for saying them. So keep a private journal. Write your unfiltered thoughts there. Never publish them. This preserves your sanity without making you a martyr. This isn't cowardice. This is recognizing that some battles can't be won and a dead soldier doesn't fight anymore. A strategic survivor can fight another day. Second, find your tribe. You're not going to convince the masses. You don't need to. You need 3 to 5 people who get it, who see what you see. They're out there, not in public spaces, in private conversations. In the look someone gives you after you say something risky that tells you they see it too. In the DM you get from someone after you posted something honest, saying, "Thank you for saying that." Those people are your tribe. Cultivate those relationships. They're proof you're not crazy and not alone. Third, learn the difference between strategic silence and cowardly silence. Strategic silence is when you know the truth, but choose not to speak, because the context is wrong. But you still act according to that truth in your private decisions. Your internal integrity remains intact. Cowardly silence is when you know the truth, don't speak it, and then act against it to protect yourself. Your internal integrity is destroyed. Here's an example. Everyone in a meeting supports a stupid decision. Strategic silence is you don't speak up, but you also don't sign the document endorsing it. Cowardly silence is you don't speak up, and you do sign because you don't want to stand out. The difference matters. Fourth, build anti-fragility. This is Nassim Taleb's concept. Anti-fragile means you gain from stress rather than just resisting it. In practice, this means construct your life so that thinking independently becomes an asset instead of a liability. Be a freelancer instead of an employee. Have multiple income streams instead of one. Develop transferable skills instead of hyper-specialized credentials that lock you into one hierarchy. When you can't be easily cancelled, you can speak more freely. Economic freedom enables intellectual freedom. Fifth, play the long game. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The punishment you face for thinking independently is a test. It separates people who actually think from people who perform thinking. You're being tested right now. 10 years from now, nobody will remember that you were difficult in 2025. But you'll remember if you sold your integrity. You'll remember if you said what you actually believed, or if you said what was safe. Play the long game. Here's the reality nobody wants to say out loud. Society has always punished independent thinkers. Socrates was executed. Galileo was forced to recant. Nietzsche died alone and mad. You're not the first person facing this. You won't be the last. But here's what's also true. They were right, and history remembers them. The conformists of their time, forgotten. Nobody remembers the Athenians who voted to kill Socrates. Nobody remembers the church officials who censored Galileo. We remember the men who were punished for thinking, not the men who did the punishing. I'm not telling you to be a martyr. I'm telling you to be honest about the choice in front of you. Conforming makes your life easier in the short term. Resisting makes it harder. But only one of those paths is actually yours. Only one of those lives belongs to you instead of to the people demanding you think what they think. On your deathbed, do you want to remember that you lived authentically, or that you were approved of by people you didn't respect? There's no wrong answer, but there is an honest one, and only you know what that is. Think about this. When was the last time you stayed silent about something true because you were afraid? What did that silence cost you internally? Was the safety you bought with it worth the price? These aren't rhetorical questions. Actually answer them. Because until you're honest with yourself about what conformity costs you personally, you can't make a real choice. They can punish you for thinking. They can exclude you, stagnate you, marginalize you. They can make your life harder in 100 different ways, but they can't make you stop thinking. They can't reach inside your head and turn off your capacity for independent thought. That choice is still yours. It will always be yours. No matter how much pressure they apply, the final decision about what you think and whether you say it, that remains with you. You can conform, you can resist, you can do some strategic hybrid of both, but you cannot pretend the choice doesn't exist, and you cannot pretend it doesn't have consequences. Whichever path you choose it consciously, not by accident, not out of fear, not through automatic conformity. Choose it because you decided to, because you weighed the costs and made a choice. That's the only freedom nobody can take from you. The freedom to decide what you'll think and who you'll be, regardless of the punishment. Everything else can be taken. Your job, your reputation, your social standing. But your mind is still yours. The question is whether you're going to keep it or hand it over for the illusion of safety. Drop a comment and tell me, what truth have you stopped saying out loud? And what has staying silent cost you? I want to know. They can punish you for thinking, but they can't make you stop. That choice is still yours.